Welcome, Duncan. Thanks for agreeing to do My Life in Music. Great to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Can I just say that when you asked me to do this, My Life in Music, my initial reaction was, My Life in Music? I've only just started. But then, and then you press pause and you think, actually, I have been doing it a long time and all kinds of weird and wonderful things. So it's nice to have a little reflection on things that you've done over the years and some of the experiences.
Well, we'll call this part one then.
Good plan. Yeah.
Part one of many. Yeah,
it'll be a box set by the time
exactly.
Finished.
Yeah, what's the first musical memory that you can think of?
First musical memory? Probably, well, I should preface this by saying, obviously my dad, Duncan Sr, was a very well-known jazz saxophonist, as well as lots of other things, songwriter, arranger, many other things. But probably I remember going to the Bull's Head in Barnes, getting a packet of crisps and lemonade. And Dad we used to live in Putney. We were in Putney for 10 years or whatever. So, I mean, and obviously I played at the Bull's Head quite a bit over the years. But I do say to people, the Bull's Head was a bit like my creche.
That's great.
So Dad would do gigs there. So that was probably my first sort of live music experience. And my mum had been a singer, sort of semi-professional. That's how she and Dad met. But she didn't really like the lifestyle very much. But actually, she'd only sort of sing at parties by this stage. But she had a really, really lovely voice. And again, it's an abiding memory of parties. And Dad would play the piano. And they'd kind of do spoof, sort of like operetta. As a child growing up, I remember the parties with all the musicians, all these wonderful characters, really funny people. And they'd get around the piano, or sometimes they'd get their instruments out. I think that was really the spark for me, because I could sense these people really knew how to have a good time. Yeah. And I thought, that's kind of a world I'd like to be in. So it wasn't like I was inspired by Charlie Parker or Mozart. All that came later, But initially I just thought, oh yeah, they seem to be just having such a good time. And I still feel that way now. Because I think if you go and do a gig, I'm sure you'd agree with me, with your fellow musicians, there's going to be funny things and you'll be laughing. And if the music's nice, that's a bonus. Yeah. But you are going to have a nice time, because musicians are just lovely people. So, I mean, the funny thing was with Dad, he was very, very busy. He'd got very involved with doing studio work and was sort of beginning to write. So, he was actually out of the house a lot. He had a very eclectic record collection, although he was a jazz player at heart, but he was very open-minded about music. And it could be anything, sort of film soundtracks, sort of singers from the 1930s, even pop things, because he did quite a lot of library music as well. He loved reggae, which would have surprised a lot of people, but I think he understood the groove nature of it. Sure. Most people probably think, if your parents are a musician, you're just going to be hearing music all the time. I don't think that was the case, but certainly in his record collection, when I was sort of getting a bit curious myself, if you're talking about sort of jazz-related things, I remember he had a record of Colin Hawkins called The Bean, which I think that was Coleman's nickname, and obviously his sound was very arresting. And I remember the other thing on the record, they had Slam Stewart, the bass player, on there, who kind of one of his I don't want to say gimmicks, because it was wonderful what he did, but I think he was one of the early guys use the bow with the bass and then sing an octave higher. Oh, okay. Which is a wonderful effect. Yeah. He did it great. And in fact, he had a duo. I found out later he had a duo with Slim Gaillard, Slam and Slim, which is a great name. And I remember the sound of that. I just loved it, and I still do, and there are people who sort of do it. The other record that sort of made an impression on me was a Duke Ellington. It's not well known. It's called Higher Sue, and I think it was an EP. It wasn't even a full thing, but I think it must have been Cootie Williams, because again, it was this sort of plunger mute, vocalized thing, and I think especially as a child, there was just something. It was kind of humorous and captivating, and and probably I wouldn't have been sophisticated enough to understand the Duke support network, the band and everything, but just that sound, but with this sort of orchestra. So they're two musical memories, sort of strong memories. And then I do remember a couple of things that Dad, you know, recordings of his, sort of semi-commercial things, but he got involved in doing that, just you know, as a player and an arranger. So yeah, so all these things sort of fed into my early interests. Yeah.
Your father's from Scotland, from I think
That's
from
right.
Garrick or Greenock.
Greenock, that's right. Yeah.
And your mother, was she?
She was from Peterborough.
Oh, okay.
And there were sort of American air bases up in that area.
A lot of them in the
yeah. So she was doing gigs, as I say, on a semi-pro basis. And then what happened was she was asked to join Kenny Graham's band. I mean, he was a big deal in London.
Right.
In fact, it was Kenny Graham's Afro-Cubist. He was a tenor player. And then Dad, but Kenny, it was like Johnny Dankworth as he was then. It was Johnny and Kenny were the two sort of big bands in London, jazz, you know, doing the jazz gigs and the jazz circuit. And then Dad moved down from Scotland because Kenny had been a judge at a competition. They both met working for Kenny. You know, so that was kind of the start of it.
So Putney was home.
Yeah, it was really South London suburbs, I guess. Southall, Putney, and then we moved to Worcester Park, and then we moved to New Malden, sort of near Kingston. So kind of that belt.
Yeah, sort of southwest London.
Yeah, it was a lot cheaper then, you know,
yeah.
any of these places. So yeah, so that's where we grew up.
When did you first start to play a musical instrument? Was it something that you did at, you know, you saw your parents and you thought, Dad, well, I fancy having to go at the saxophone, or was it a different route? Or did you?
It was a different route. I did have piano lessons when I was probably 7 or 8 for about a year, and probably like a lot of people, wasn't really that keen on them. I wanted to play Motown or whatever. Wasn't interested in doing a Bard Prelude or whatever. Can you play a Bard Prelude when you've just begun? Probably not. But yeah, funny enough, the one good thing for me, the piano teacher got me doing theory of music pretty much simultaneously. Right. And funny enough, I really enjoyed that bit of the lessons more than the practicing the piano, and so that kind of drifted away. And then really, I just became a bit of a football obsessive. Right. And what Dad did for a living, you know, was neither here nor there.
Yeah, sure.
He could be off doing his fancy gigs with Frank Sinatra or, I don't know, Benny Goodman. And if Frank Sinatra had played for Chelsea, I'd have been impressed. But I mean, actually, funny enough, that reminds me, because I think I'd have been 9 years old, and it was the 1970 World Cup. And I got up one morning to go to school, and Dad said, I've got something for you. And he gave me an autograph book. And it was all the big players of the day, Gordon Banks, Bobby Moore, Bobby Charlton. And I was, you know, it was, oh, this is wonderful. And I said, where did you get it? And he said, oh, I did Top of the Pops last night. And they had the England squad on because they'd done like a novelty. There was a big vogue back then for football teams would do sort of like a novelty thing.
Records, and
because England were playing in the World Cup, they'd done a sort of novelty song, and they were on Top of the Pops. So Dad got a chance. And you know, I'd said to him years later, that was such a light bulb moment, because I thought, so if you become a musician, you might get to meet professional footballers. And it's never happened.
Oh, no.
I haven't practiced enough.
I did a couple of years of doing the PFA Awards at the Grosvenor House Hotel.
Oh, jealous.
And it was one of those gigs that just kind of fell into my lap, and I did it with a quartet. And we'd be there, and it was always in April. Yeah. Not quite the end of the season, but getting there, and all these players would turn up and get their awards. I remember when we did it, there was Wayne Rooney and Ronaldo and all these kind of players. They're just like you and I, you know. Actually, they're not that. You know, you've got this idea these footballers are like giants, and
exactly
there he is, just looks like a normal person. Yeah,
that's right. As I say, it was football all the way. And then when I started at secondary school, so I was probably about 13. But it was that age, you know, when all my mates would begin to play and they were trying to put bands together. I thought, oh yeah, I'd like to get sort of involved in this. And I thought, oh, well, Dad's got loads of instruments, saxophones lying around the house. I thought, I might as well give that a go. It was just convenience. It wasn't
no pressure from.
Yeah, and actually Dad, I mean, really had a wonderful attitude, because, and it's the same with Ross, my younger brother, he didn't force us into it. He said everybody's going to find their own path. And also, because he'd been self-taught, he didn't see himself as a teacher at all. I mean, actually, I think he was a very good teacher, but it wasn't in a kind of formalised way. It was slightly more like osmosis, you know.
Yeah.
But once he saw I was getting into it, and obviously then I was starting to play with my friends and enjoying that. Then he, you know, I mean, once he saw I was getting interested, it was, you know, he was helping me, you know. Yeah. And then after I think I've been playing about a year, saxophone I started on, he said, oh, yeah, you should really think about playing the clarinet. I said, okay, I'll give it a go, why not, you know. And so I said, can you give me some lessons? And he said, oh, I don't know anything about the clarinet. And then about a year later, have you thought about the flute? That might be, well, yeah, okay, I like the flute, it's lovely. And, right, can you give me some lessons? I don't know anything about the flute. Go and see so-and-so. And I'd say, but you were doing a film session yesterday and playing the flute. Actually, you played a very nice flute, you know. Yeah. But, I think because he was self-taught, he really respected people he saw coming from a more kind of academic or a college sort of background. Yeah. So it's sort of interesting with hindsight because, I mean, naturally I was very lucky because, I can't even sort of remember. I mean, he did show me things, but it never felt like a lesson. Yeah. And it wasn't like, oh, right, 6 o'clock on, I mean, partly because of his work schedule, but if he had the opportunity and a bit of spare time, or he might just sort of play a bit of piano, get me to play like a bit of a jam session, you know. So really, I consider myself very lucky. I mean, from that point of view, and also he was such a lovely man, as you knew Dad as well, and he was just, you can't choose your parents, but I mean, I was lucky really with both my mum and dad, because I'd have liked them if I'd had nothing to do with them. So you've got to consider yourself lucky if that is the case. And naturally, once I ended up in the business, it was a very nice, you know, something we could share together, you know. So
great.
So it was all good stuff. So that's it. So that's kind of like a lot of things. Probably I'd say all feels a little slightly haphazard. And I'm always fascinated though by people who have become musicians, and there's kind of no, because I think again another advantage for me was when I eventually decided I was going to try and make a go of it. I thought I understood how the business kind of worked. And I mean, Dad was successful, but naturally there were ups and downs, even for him. Yeah. If you're a freelancer, there always are going to be. You know, he'd have his quiet spells and then other things. Even though he's, you know, by anybody's standard, he would be seen as a very successful guy. But I mean, it's just you know, that things can happen. So to a certain extent, I went in with my eyes open. You know, if you want to become a musician, how do you explain to parents who have no knowledge of the music? You know, because quite often people say, well, how are you going to make a living?
Yeah, exactly. You know? Yeah. So your first kind of bands, what kind of things were they? Were your friends? Were they school friends?
Yeah, they were school friends. And
this was kind of like popular music?
Yeah, it was kind of, sort of slightly poppy things. But I think it was that time, so it was the sort of mid-70s. And it was sort of when the kind of, what we're going to call it, jazz rock, fusion, what you want. So that was sort of beginning. And actually that was a very good... that was a good way in for me. So that sort of thing probably grabbed me a little bit more than sort of mainstream kind of acoustic groups. So I remember Dad had an album that Chick Corea, it was Stan Getz, called Captain Marvel. It's a wonderful record, and it was doing all Chick's compositions, Stanley Clarke and Tony Williams on drums, and I think Airto on percussion. I mean, it's really a classic
great album,
and I think Getz is magnificent, and it says a lot about Stan Getz, but he was a master of playing the Great American Songbook, but he always challenged himself. And I think the way he plays on Chick's tunes is definitive. Yeah. It's a really wonderful album, but that kind of got me interested, and I love the tunes, and that kind of led me to Chick Corea, who was doing Return to Forever, his own things like The Leprechaun, and I just absolutely loved them, because they had a groove thing that I wasn't really sort of, I think it was later that I came to appreciate more of a sort of conventional. So really we would kind of influence that, and a bit of soul, sort of average white band, that kind of thing. So we were sort of having a go at trying to, well, the Crusaders, of course, you know. Yeah.
So your first gigs, what were the first kind of gigs you did then?
Well, actually, what happened, there was a school friend of mine, well, when I say it was a school friend, he was in my year group, and it was called Andrew McGibbon. He'd left the school early, and he'd gone to a sort of sixth form college, and he rang me up out of the blue, and he said, oh, do you remember me? I was at school with you. I said, yeah, of course I remember you. I didn't really have anything to do with him, because actually, funny enough, I didn't even know he was involved in music. And he said, well, I've started at a sort of sixth form college. And he said, I've taken up the drums. And he said, I've written some songs and I want to record them. I just wondered if you might want to come and play on the demo, you know, this little pokey old studio. I turned up there and I mean, he just sort of blew me away. I mean, and it was a bit of a, the school didn't have a the music department just didn't function, you know, but luckily there were enough that we were keen, if you're keen enough and there's like-minded people, you get your own things going. And I thought, how did they let this guy slip through the net? Because he's still one of the most musical people I know. I mean, he was a wonderful drummer, just natural time, and a really good white soul singer, you know.
Yeah.
And he could sort of hear, he didn't have any kind of nuts and bolts knowledge, but he could do harmonies, you know, those sort of people who they just pick things out. How the hell do you work that out? You know, I'd have to be at the piano working it all out. Great musician, and we sort of, we got a band going. It was kind of like a jazz fusion thing, and then we got residency in a pub, usual thing, and then we just do sort of little pick-up gigs. I mean, we do slightly functiony thing, probably did a few weddings, you know, so we tailored the set to more kind of whatever the things was. But it was good because I think with Andrew as well, I'd say he was such a natural player, and I think I learned a lot about time from him, and I think that's the wonderful thing about rhythm section players. I think you can fool yourself as a frontline player that your time's okay. Yeah. It's only when you work with really good rhythm section, you think, okay, I've got something to learn here, you know. And again, I think he's one of those guys. He, you know, I must tell him this next time I see him. You know, I mean, he kind of taught. He was one of my music teachers, although we were sort of peers.
Yeah. You learned so much from him.
So it was, it was a really nice time. So they're probably the first sort of proper gigs that I remember doing. Yeah. Yeah,
I mean, that sounded like it was kind of almost semi-professional, kind of like some.
I don't.
Did you do any kind of? You said you did some functions.
Yeah, but they were kind of for friends, really. They weren't on any formal sort of footing, you know, where you could even pretend you were making any sort of living out of it. I think what happened was when I left school, I was pretty academic at school, but like a lot of people, I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do. Maybe I could have gone to university, and I think I have vague ideas of maybe being a journalist.
Okay.
It was all a little bit half-baked, and I think I was just sort of drifting a bit. But I think at the time I thought, well, maybe this is the thing with having a successful parent. You know, you're setting yourself up for a fall here. And actually, with hindsight, I'd say the saxophone just happened to be because there were ones lying about. And actually, probably, maybe I should have taken up another instrument, because probably you shouldn't be inviting direct comparisons, you know. Yeah. So I think there were a few slightly inhibiting things. So I kind of did, when I left school, I thought I'd just take some time out. I wanted a bit of travelling anyway, so I kind of worked for a year and a half. I did the usual, I worked in a factory, little kind, you know, washing up job, just whatever came up. Basically just put money aside, and then I did a bit of travelling, went over to America for 3 months, you know, with some friends. But then when I came back, I thought, well, I think I will give the music thing a go. And at the time, I mean, the world has changed so much now. I mean, so primarily, I mean, I was playing the flute and the clarinet, but you couldn't do, say, like an associated board exam on the sax, because it wasn't seen as a proper orchestral instrument. I mean, I don't know why, because Prokofiev wrote for the sax, Debussy wrote for the sax. You know, I thought, well, all the I mean, admittedly, it wasn't a permanent member, but it was used as a voice, you know, within orchestral music already. But for whatever reason, it was all a bit stuffy. And the music college, I mean, I'd done grade 8 clarinet when I was in the 6th form, and back in those days, if you got a distinction, sort of in the high mark zone, they used to have a competition. Everybody in the country who got distinction, there was a scholarship at the Royal College of Music, and I went to see a kind of clarinet specialist for a kind of consultation lesson, and to be honest, he slightly put me off, because he said, you won't stand. I mean, which I think is perfectly true. Although I'd say to anybody now, you know, just give it a go, see what happens, you know, because it's going to force you to do some practice. But at the same time, I thought, well, the saxophone's really what I like, and sort of more jazz, commercial side of things. I've got no aspirations to be sat in an orchestra. So, and at the time, Leeds College of Music was the only place that had a kind of jazz popular music course going on there. And I actually went up there. In fact, it was with the guitarist who played in my school band, Peter Beckman, and we both went up to have a look around the college, and it did look really, really good. Peter stayed up there, he did the course, and he's gone to become a very successful producer. He's got his own studio, he's a very talented sort of engineer, and again, a very good natural musician. But I think for me, I just sort of thought, well, I think I'd rather sort of stay in London, because I thought I'm probably going to go there for 3 years and then just come straight. I already live in London, you know. So again, I was lucky in that respect, because a lot of people want to come to London, but I thought, well, I'm already here. I was beginning to do some bits and pieces, you know, and I thought, well, I've got a little bit of momentum going here. So what I did, I thought, because we lived in Kingston, there was Kingston Polytechnic that is now Kingston University. I thought, well, maybe what I should do is a music degree. And I think in the back of my mind, because Dad had done some writing, and he was encouraging me to do some, because he said, look, he said, playing's a lot of fun, but he said, if you can break into writing because of the royalty thing, again, you've still got to be, do you know what I mean, get there.
Yeah.
But he was encouraging me to write, so I thought, well, I might, because the course had some like composition element to it. You studied counterpoint and the kind of theory of all that stuff, and so although it was quite a classical course, but also it gave me a chance to. Funny enough, I reunited with the piano. I played the sax the longest. I went in as a clarinet student,
right,
but I had to do the piano as a second study. But then at that age, I absolutely loved playing the piano, and I had a very nice teacher, very patient, and then I was quite happy doing proper 5-finger exercises and all that, which again has been useful from an arranging point of view and for teaching, you know, trying to accompany my students, all that. So yeah, so I started the course at Kingston.
And I guess going back to what you said, you know, when you first started, you were always very interested in the theory side of it and how the nuts and bolts, how it all works, how it's all put together.
I think the thing that I always was good for me, I think I had a good harmonic ear. I could sort of hear sort of harmonies, you know, well. I think where I really struggled, I mean, this is sort of moving on a little bit later, I think with improvising, this is rather weird. I found it very difficult I could think in that direction, I could hear the chords, but I found it difficult to go forwards.
Right.
You know, if you're talking about improvising over things, that was which might sound a little bit odd. You know, so I had a lot of sophistication in that direction, and a terrible lack of ability in that, and that was something I had to really sort of deal with. I did. I mean, when I sort of eventually turned professor, I mean, just to sort of backtrack with my Kingston uni, I did a 1.5 years. It was a 3-year course, sort of BMUS degree course, and I enjoyed my time at Kingston very much. It was up on Kingston Hill, which is nice. This big old house, Coomhurst. I enjoyed the course very much, had a lot of good friends there, and again got a chance to do quite a bit of playing, and again I did play a bit in the orchestra, chamber ensemble, so it was good because I was already doing sort of big band things outside of there, but I was beginning to do a little bit of professional work, and I was doing some work at the National Theatre, and the opportunity to go abroad with a production came up, so I went to see the head of music and I said, look, I've had this opportunity, would I be able to take some time off the course? And he said, well, it's a little bit long, you know, but he said, look, what I would suggest is it's a nice opportunity. Why don't you take a year off, have a sabbatical, and then come back and finish the degree? And I said, well, that'd be great. But I found the problem was once I'd left the course, I mean, there was a lot of work then, I had freelance work, so I didn't have time. I was sort of it was like jumping into a river and suddenly you're just sort of doing stuff, and I forgot. I mean, the ironic thing was about 5-6 years later, I'd actually I bought my first place in Kingston, and I got a call from this head of music, and he said, oh, hi Duncan, it's Eddie Ho here. And I thought, what am I calling me? You know, did I not return a library book? And he said, we've got a student this year, and he's a piano player, but he wants to play second study saxophone, which was only like a half-hour lesson a week. So that's what it was. He said, I don't suppose you'd be interested in taking him on. But he said, I hear you're living locally. I said, well, that'd be great, because I thought, well, he could probably come to my place. I've got a piano there. I could make him a cup of tea. There wouldn't be any of the kind of pressures when everybody's fighting for practice rooms. So that's what I did. So perversely, I ended up, even though I didn't finish the course, I was a saxophone teacher. I mean, again, that's just typical of the craziness of the music business, isn't it? Because I don't think that would happen now, but for whatever reason it did. So
that's great. That was your first student. It was your first into teaching other people, was it?
Yeah. I think it probably was, and then it sort of built up from them, and sort of at its height. I mean, I had some very good. I was then getting some first study. Actually, the good thing, even Richard, the guy that I taught, the first guy, I mean, he was very much involved in the kind of classical side of the saxophone, which is again, and I was completely honest with him. I said, Richard, I don't know a lot of the repertoire. I haven't come up through that thing. I said it's been more of a jazz commercial thing, you know. And this is the lovely thing about teaching. I probably learned as much, hopefully, as he did, because I got to know that repertoire and that whole world, which again has been useful for me because I've sort of had my toe in that world for a little bit, you know, and it's good. And actually, he was a very fine player. So he was although it was a second study, really, it was more like kind of first study. But then I was picking up some, and I mean, again, as a teacher, that's great because you really have to, you know, up your game, you know, just keep up with your students. So, yeah. So again, it was a lucky break for me.
So when did you first start to, I know that you've, you know, extensively worked in the West End.
I have, yeah.
Was that kind of like the next stage, or?
Yeah, again, I don't think it was, again, it's the sort of thing, I find sometimes hear sort of well-known actors saying about, and then obviously you chose to do this, as if there's any choice in it. It was, again, something I drifted into. I mean, when I came back from my National Theatre trip, I mean, I joined a function band, again, who were really busy. They were working, it was just a run-of-the-mill function band, but we pretty much worked 6 nights a week, and it was well paid. Wasn't particularly interesting musically, but again, I think I got it in my head. I thought, well, I can read music, and then I can try and get my so-called writing career going. I think I was already seeing myself going up to receive the Oscar, best film score, but without the difficult bit in between, you know. Yeah. But anyway, that's kind of the plan. But to be honest, after about 18 months of doing this, because the thing was, I remember it was a bit of a feral existence. We'd do gigs, I don't know, Western-super-Mare, get back, you know, 3 o'clock in the morning, Hammersmith Odeon, whatever, I can't remember, I don't know what it's called now. Get back there 3 in the morning, go home, sleep, get up at 11 o'clock, midday, and then just repeat. And then it was like a big, so the chance of really doing writing wasn't going to happen. But I was sort of making a living, but I was getting a little bit disillusioned with it. And then I got a phone call from Alan Barnes.
Okay.
Who you know well, wonderful saxophone player. And Alan at the time was in the Pasadena Roof Orchestra. And he said to me, oh, the Pasadena Roof Orchestra have got a residency in Paris, and it was for 3 months. But he said, I mean, Alan was beginning to do a bit of freelance work, and he said, I don't want to be away for 3 months from London. Are you interested in splitting it with me? And I leapt it, and so I handed my notice in the function band, and you know, 2 weeks later, I was over in Paris, having a wonderful time. And it was funny because it was one of those, when you're that age, I thought, do I want to be doing this? I was, you know, but really, you know, that phone call from Alan changed a lot of things because, you know, I have said this to Alan. I said, you saved me from function band hell. I should say, and you know, talking about function bands, I mean, there's a place for them. And I think in later years, when I enjoy doing functions and having people and getting people up to dance, it's a lovely thing to be able to do. But I think it was the grind of it, and there was some politics and everything. So leaving that aside. But when I did the PRO thing over in Paris, I mean, apart from you're in Paris, you know, and it was a very memorable trip, and it was lovely. And also playing in the band was really, because I've been doing these function band things. But I mean, again, I think function bands, if you're a rhythm section player, is a very good training ground. But possibly if you're a blower, especially for doing loads of 80, they were just like the synth pads written out. So it's basically just playing some long notes. Wasn't really that interesting, but doing the PRO thing, suddenly there was like loads of notes and all articulate, and it was really challenging, and it kind of reinvigorated me.
Oh, great.
So, and then I thought, no, I do like being a musician. and again, to this day, I don't know, it's just a call out the blue, somebody I'd never heard of, and he said, oh, I'm putting a band together for a tour of the show Blood Brothers, which was written by Willie Russell, the playwright. He'd written the music as well. He was like a folk guitarist, and I mean, this is the weird thing. So I had a bit of experience, and the tour started in Nottingham, and it was like an 8-month tour.
Right.
And I thought, that sounds good to me. Sounds like good fun, you know, when you're in your early 20s, and it was a lot of fun. But I turned up in Nottingham. I remember I got there nice and early because the rest of the band had already, they'd done the show in the West End.
Right.
It had started life in Liverpool Playhouse, and then it had come into the West End. It didn't do, I think it ran for about 6 months. It wasn't a big hit, but it became a bit of a cult show. And then they decided to do this tour, and whoever the sax player was, he'd left. I didn't know him, so I still don't really know how I ended up on the gig. I got to Nottingham, I got there early, and I was sort of, all the chairs were out, you know, there were music stands, but they were like folders. But I opened up the folder that said sax and flute or something, empty. which is weird. And then a guy turned up with a trumpet case and he said, "Oh, hi, I'm Graham." And I said, "Oh, I'm Duncan." I said, "I'm doing the tour on sax." He said, "Great." I said, "I'm just wondering, do you know if the music is around? I just want to have a quick look, see what's coming up." And he said, "Oh, there isn't any." What? You can do West Side Story like this, you know. He said, and it turned out, as I say, Willie, the guy who'd written the music, I mean, he was really like a folk guitarist, 3-chord player, basic, and they were all basic rock musicians. They didn't read, so they were like head things. Right. So Graham just sort of said, "Oh yeah, there's in this tune, the first tune, there's just, I play a riff," and he'd sort of play something, and he said, "Oh yeah, the second one, yeah, can you just sort of noodle around on E minor?"
It's like being in a band, isn't it?
It was, yeah. It was more like doing, yeah. It was sort of doing that sort of thing. So it was a slightly unusual route, but it was a wonderful, wonderful tour because it was one of those tours that everybody got on, the cast, right, the crew, and it was a lovely experience. But the thing was, the next, I don't know if it was on the back of that, but then I did another tour, but that was doing Guys and Dolls, which is obviously a kind of American classic, and that was more like what you'd expect. Yeah. It had been at the National Theatre, and then it came into the West End. Yeah, so I was sort of in that world. And I think, again, quite good for me because, I say, Dad was sort of involved in the session work and sort of jazz things. That was kind of his world. And I sort of found a little bit of a niche for me to be in, which I think in those days was probably good for me just to feel own place, you know. So I didn't do that. And, I mean, the West End, I think, it's an interesting little world. And also it's good because you do get people from the jazz world or the classical thing, or you get a very interesting sort of mixture of musicians. And again, as going back to where I started, I'm talking about parties at mum and dad's, it's a very nice social hub, you know. You bump into people if you work in the West End as a matinee. Yeah. There'll be people, "Oh, we're going for a meal, you know, from such and such a show," and people get together, and it's a nice supportive environment, you know.
It can be very difficult to break out of that though, because it can be very comfortable.
I've often said to people it's a bit of a Faustian pact because it's probably one of the few areas where the kind of rates of pay have stayed in line, because it's easier for the musicians union to negotiate because it's kind of a factory. Yeah. Or the theatres are factories, so everybody's kind of doing the same thing. I think out in the bigger wide world, gigs sort of vary so much and it's a bit more of the Wild West, isn't it? That's why it's become quite an attractive magnet for a lot of players. But as I say, I think I've seen it from both sides. I mean, I think a lot of the shows that were my gig were fairly short-lived. I mean, in some cases, complete and utter fiascos. But fiascos can be interesting. But I used to go in as a deputy on Starlight Express was the first thing that I did. But I mean, again, I remember when I turned up to do Starlight for a lovely guy called, well, there were two saxes, Ken Paul and Pete Ripper. And I remember when I did Pete's thing, I looked at his list of deputies. I thought, I wish I hadn't looked at this, because it was Stan Saltzman, Ronnie Ross, Jimmy Hastings. It was all these amazing players, and I thought, oh my God, oh dear. But it was, yeah, it was fine, you know. I'd done my homework, so I got through it. But I was kind of conscious, that thing, again, of the route, because that is the problem with shows. It's a lovely idea in theory, but they expect you to turn up every night and play the same thing. Yeah. Because that's just what the gig is. So I don't know if musicians really are hardwired for that much repetition. I think the thing is that there's been a school, like with the actors, they put them on short-term contracts. If the show turns into a big hit, they might do 6 months and go on. I think there's always been a little bit of resistance to that, because most musicians quite like a regular gig. And I think as well, when they draw the contracts up, there's a problem with pensions. You know, if you've got different people. So I mean, if it's one of the few areas where you can have these sort of normal working arrangements, you know. But yeah, I got to work with a lot of very, very good musicians.
Outside of the West End, was anything that you...
I think I was still slightly chasing the dream of doing some writing, because I remember when I did Guys and Dolls, because I had regular money, I bought a Porter Studio, which was like one of those first... This shows how long ago it was, a cassette, but it was a little multi-track.
Yeah, what the Tascam one.
Yeah, do you remember them?
Yeah, amazing.
You can't remember them, surely. You know, so I remember buying that, and, you know, my room, and recorded a few demos and things up there. And, yeah, I was really enjoying myself. And, again, going back to my school days, I had friends, I had musicians, but there was a lot of drama people, and they were putting plays on. So sometimes I'd be writing music.
Oh, great.
So, you know, maybe for their incidental music. And actually there was in fact, I reconnected with him very recently, and a friend of mine, and he made some films like short films. Wrote some music for those, something at a very basic level, but it was really good fun, and it was interesting seeing these things, you know,
come to life. Yeah,
I was rather delighted that they still even existed. So it was really fascinating. I think when I was doing the show, I was very conscious. I mean, when I did that tour of Guys and Dolls, Steve Waterman was playing trumpet in it, and Mark Chandler, two wonderful jazz trumpet players. Bobby Orr was on drums, the great Bobby Orr. Jim Richardson was on bass. You know, and I mean, it's a kind of show. It's a wonderful score. It's a kind of jazz, or I mean, really, they're the shows that I've
gravitated towards.
And I did things like Sweet Charity. I mean, Cy Coleman, the songs are great, but they're kind of I feel more at home for obvious reasons doing those kind of things. So it was great, you know, especially when we were out on tour, because then we could have a bit of a jam and all that sort of thing.
And what about your kind of jazz playing? So obviously now you're kind of being a professional musician, working in the West End, getting calls from people left, right and centre to do interesting things. I mean, for me, it was doing big bands, really. I mean, again, just to backtrack slightly, when I was probably 16, was it Jazz Services? It was one of the networks that sort of set up. So this would be in the mid-70s. And they did, I mean, it seems strange now because there's a lot of jazz courses in the summer, the Easter, Christmas. Yeah. You know, there's tons of them, but there were hardly any back then. But they did one in London at a school in Pimlico. And Olaf Fast, the saxophone player, was a friend of the family, lovely man, and again, very encouraging. He said, "Oh, you should go on it. I think you'd enjoy it," which I did. It was great. I really did. And then in the afternoon, we did our little sessions. And Bill Ashton, who ran NYJO, National Youth Jazz Orchestra, I suppose he came on a bit of a talent scouting thing and checked out the little group. So I was in a group with a trombone player called John Harborne. Bill came up and I don't know if you've met Bill, have you? Very forceful character, legendary. "What do you do on a Saturday morning?" I don't do anything. I did have a Saturday job, but it was in a fish and chip shop in the evening. I said, "I don't think of Saturday morning." "Right, come along to NYJO." And then John, "What do you do on a Saturday morning?" I said, "I don't, you know, you're coming to NYJO." I went to some of the NYJO rehearsals. I mean, the band sounded it always sounds good, NYJO. It doesn't matter what these talented people come in. I looked at the music, and I mean, I was a pretty good sight reader, but I mean, it was just other level for me, and I thought, I can't, and these people seem to be sight reading it. And I remember because Chris Hunter, who ended up in New York and has made a stellar career for himself out there, he was probably my age. He might have been younger, I don't know, but I mean, it was when David Sanborn was like the guy, and I mean, Chris just sounded like Dave Sanborn with about 10 times more technique. He sounded incredible, and it felt like a very competitive environment as well, and maybe a bit sink or swim. And I think I love the collaborative side of music. I don't see it as a competition, really. No. I might be being a little bit unfair here. So I went along for a few weeks, and then John, my friend, he said, "It's not really my cup of tea." And I said, "I don't think it is mine, you know." But I mean, I would hold my hand up and said, "Plus, I don't think I'm really good enough for it, you know." But he said, "Well, there's a band at Morley College." And actually I went there, and that was a very different environment. And it was kind of more interesting band. It was quite experimental. Right. I don't know if you've heard of the band there. No, I know of the college. Well, I know they do courses.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they've always had a really interesting sort of music-related, you know, classical orchestras. But the band, I mean, it's funny how everything ties in. Yeah. When Bill Russo, the American arranger for Stan Kenton and loads of West Coast projects, he got a grant. He came to London to study, I think at the Royal College under somebody or other. Teach there, so he had a year's grant to come, and he set up a big band here. And Dad used to do it. This has been the early '60s, and I remember Dad telling me, he said Bill rehearsed, and he said everybody was so busy doing sessions or whatever. The band used to rehearse at midnight. It was midnight to 2 in the morning, and he said if anybody was late, Bill Russo would just go on the stroke of midnight, be coming out and just go 3, 4, even with people missing, even if it was like 2 players, and he'd just keep going. And so Dad was involved in the band, and one of the trumpet players was a guy called Gordon Rose, and they kept this idea going, not at that time in the morning, and they used to rehearse at Morley, and Gordon ran that band for years, and it was a wonderful training ground. I mean, Gordon was a great educator. He'd been one of the trumpet players on West Side Story when it first began. Very funny man, and probably apart from Dad, I think I probably learnt more from Gordon than maybe anybody else I've known. I mean, he had all those kind of, it might have come from Bill Russo, things about look after the on the beat notes and the off beat notes will look after themselves. He had all those kind of sayings, but actually they're all things that I've said to students over the years, so they definitely went in. I remember the other thing with the saxes, we always sat there, sort of latest gear on and everything. We'd play something, maybe Mark Pianissimo, and he'd just be like shaking his head. And he'd say, what's the point of having those expensive mouthpieces if you can't play piano? Play quietly. Which again, is totally true. He was absolutely right. So he was a great guy. So, and actually the interesting thing, I say John, my friend, the trombone player, John was there, that's where I met Steve Buckley, John Ecott. It was pretty much a big section of what became Loose Tubes.
Right.
Everything feeds into one another, and they kind of got involved with the Loose Tubes and everything. And I remember I used to go in depth on the Loose Tubes rehearsal, which was wonderful because it was so exciting, all the stuff that Django Bates was bringing. Well, all the guys wrote, but obviously Django was a big, such a talent, and I ended up, I depped a couple of times for Julian Arguelles was doing it on baritone. That's the other thing probably I should say about big bands. I think the good thing for me was, maybe this is because I am a frustrated bass player, but I really enjoyed playing the baritone. Right. A lot of sax players don't, because it doesn't sort of have the glamour of the others, but I think that function of being at the bottom end, going back to Alan Barnes, Alan plays great baritone, and I think he said the same thing. He's quite happy being at the bottom end, although he's very good up at the top end as well, but I was quite happy playing baritone. And also I think, going back to this is a very circuitous route, we're talking about playing jazz. I think the other thing was, I enjoy playing baritone, but you're not going to be asked to play solos that often on the baritone in a big band. It just doesn't happen very often. And that kind of suited me, because I just sort of thought, well, there's other people who do it better, and I'm quite happy to let them sort of get on with it. But I was still part of a band and everything. And then I used to deb with Mike Westbrook's big band, which was great, because Mike's a very interesting writer, and he writes sort of challenging things to do. So really the baritone was a good route. It's
a good way in, wasn't it?
It was a good route in for me. And then again, going back to my moving on a bit, eventually I got married and had kids. So, and again, that's really when it was useful when the kids were young, that sort of theatre thing. And I was offered a show in London. That's the only sort of show that I've done that did run for a couple of years, 2.5 years or something. And it was great because my kids were very little, so it was just nice having a regular gig. What I found very useful was that I used to dep the show, because again, like most people who do shows, you try and get out and do other things naturally, just for your own sanity as much as anything. I depped a bit with it was a kind of 1930s band called Vile Bodies, and I got to know Jim Tomlinson, the saxophone player. And Jim got me into dep there used to be a tea dance at the Waldorf.
Right.
And it was a 5-piece, it was 2 saxes, Jim played alto and clarinet, and there was a guy called Greg Davis, who wasn't a full-time player, but he was a nice tenor player, piano, bass, drums. Playing for tea dancing, but Felix Rigg, the piano player, he'd written the pad,
right? So
it was, but all nice tunes and plenty of solo, because as long as it cha-cha-cha or something, and then solos. And that was kind of when I really started playing jazz. I used to dep for both Greg and Jim. Jim is a lovely player, he's a lovely person apart from anything else, and
is he the guy who's married to?
He's married to Stacey Kent. Yeah.
He's a very Stan Getz type.
Yes, he's got that sort of approach, and he's got a lovely. I used to really enjoy him playing with him because he was very happy to sit back on the beat, and it was enjoyable. Jim's got very good time, and plays in a very melodic way, like you say, sort of gets influenced. So I didn't feel. I think that's the thing sometimes with jazz playing. I don't know if you've had the same thing, but it's very easy to feel like people expect me to play like this.
Yeah.
Sometimes in big bands you've kind of got to.
Yeah.
There's a bit of a template, and I think playing in big bands is quite difficult. Whereas if it's something else.
Yeah, and the whole thing with big bands, you've got 16 bars to solo.
Yeah.
And that,
And sometimes and some people are very good. They're like unleash the dogs of hell, and they're bang, and they're all over it, and it's great, and I love it. But I don't think I do that. I'll give it a go, but I don't think I do it particularly well. If you get somebody who's, I don't know, Bob Sider's brilliant because he's there and it's bang on and he does it brilliantly. There's a lot of
suit that side of your personality or what you want to express.
Yeah. But I found when I did the gig, although it was a kind of commercial gig, it's a tea dance, but I really found it helped my jazz playing a lot. I knew a lot of songs, standard tunes and everything, so I didn't mind doing little backgroundy gigs where it wasn't that little busking things because I knew tunes, but it wasn't like there was any pressure. But sort of around that time, I was doing some gigs. Again, it was a guy, I didn't know him. He just seemed to get a lot of wedding gigs, but it just quite often it'd just be a duo.
Right.
But he used to book really good piano, like, you know, John Critchinson would do it. He used to be with Ronnie Scott's band, Don Innes, you know, and again, that's really lovely because you're playing, I mean, they play an intro and it just sounded like a, you know, like an orchestral arrangement. It was great. And then you could sort of play a tune. And so it was sort of relaxed. I didn't feel I was in any kind of spotlight or whatever. And then to say, doing the dance, the thing at the Waldorf, I was sort of beginning to find my feet. Going back to what I was saying earlier about this sort of thing, I thought, oh, it's like a lot of things in music. I thought, oh, there is a way to do it. Yeah. You know, and I'm sort of beginning to do it. And I think you put your finger on it. I thought I could hear, I felt obliged to maybe address every note in the chord. When I look back, I think, what was I thinking? You just can't do that, you know. Yeah. But
you have these kind of eureka moments where you just go, well, you know, you just wake up, oh, I'm doing it all wrong. I should be just thinking about like this way instead of that way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then I thought, oh yeah, that's, you know, and actually probably because of the way that Jim, I mean, it's funny because I don't know why I didn't twig it with the way that Dad played, because he was very melodic, you know, except in Dad's case, he really had a very unusual harmonic sense. I mean, I used to call him a romantic subversive because he played in a very pretty way, but he played completely outrageous things. And I used to say to him, I said, oh, I did a gig last night. I said, have you been out again, you know, scaring people with your major thirds on the minor chords, that sort of thing. But I mean, really, he had a very unique way and would do really kind of outrageous things, but that, I think maybe that's something I almost had to get away with and get back to basics. And maybe I was trying to emulate him in some respect, but I didn't really have I didn't have enough of the basics and the foundations in place. But I mean, even now when I play, I don't know if it always comes off, but I try and do something. It doesn't always work, but I think let's give it a go. And actually with students, I always sort of say to them, it's always work, because I said naturally having some theory, all these things will feed in, but I do try and encourage them to just play random as well. It's fine, just see what comes out. I mean, I'm not advocating it as something you wanted, you know, unless you want to go into sort of freeform, aleatoric, whatever terms they're using these days. You know, I mean, there's a place for that. But I say it's just interesting sometimes to give yourself a little bit of freedom, you know, because you can improve your playing, you know, by thinking, analyze, you know, doing the sort of Jamie episode. Oh, here's a chord, and I'm going to play this scale. No, that's a good way in. You know, but it's not the only way to skin a cat.
No, exactly. You've done a lot of kind of arranging for sort of film and TV work as well. How did you get into some of that?
I did do a film music course at Goldsmiths. It was just a summer. It was a summer course. It was run by a guy called Don Ray. I mean, he's not very well known, but he used to do a lot of kind of 60s, 70s TV stuff in Hollywood. I sometimes see his name. It might be an episode of Columbo or something like that. Okay. We had various music cues to write, and then they booked I think it was a 16-piece band, so we had to write music, and there were students from the Royal College. Actually, something about Don, he was a very inspirational guy, because he could sort of make you feel like you could do it, like one of those good Americans, you know, and he sort of, oh yeah, alto, flute, marimba, and I don't know, something else, you know, theremin or something. Wonderful combination, you know, so it was all that sort of thing. But I remember the day before the session when we were at Goldsmiths, he said, no, look, he gave us a pep talk. He said, it's very important when you're working with musicians in a studio environment. He said, time's limited. It's very important to, you know, make a comfortable environment so the musicians can give the best of themselves, and they want to play well and they need to feel comfortable. And we were sort of looking up, you know, right, okay. But when we actually got into the studio, I mean, Don completely disregarded his own device. He was just shouting, come on, we haven't got enough to can't you get that bit together, you know? So, but good advice, nevertheless. But he didn't really follow it. But yeah, that was good to do, because it sort of gave me a bit of confidence doing that. And then on the back of that, I met a cellist, and he was doing things at the London Film School. He was sort of like an in-house composer, and he took a sort of sabbatical, and I did several, I mean, they were kind of short films, 15, 20 minutes. They weren't long, but that was good, because they were pretty open-minded. So, and it gave me a chance to try things. I mean, I love the harp as an instrument. I don't know anything about it, but I try and use a harp if I could. Yeah. If I felt it was appropriate, I wouldn't shoehorn it in regardless. But it just gave me a chance to try some different I mean, they're generally like small groups because there wasn't really any budget or anything, so it was all a bit hand to mouth. But it was.
And you would do this arranging purely sitting at the piano. This is before doors and things like that.
Oh yeah. It was all sort of the old school pencil and paper sort of thing. But then I sort of got involved a bit more with sort of commercial stuff, maybe for singers who wanted arrangements. I mean, actually, in terms of, say, big band writing, probably that's been the bulk of what I've done. And then sort of from a commercial, actually, when Strictly Come Dancing first started, which must be 18, 19 years ago now, the musical director then was Laurie Holloway, who's done a lot of that. He's been a TVMD.
Yeah.
But Laurie is a very nice, very, very good, well, he's a very good everything musician, arranger, but a very nice jazz piano player. I don't know if you've
I used
had a chance to...
Yeah, only things like Parkinson and things like that.
Yeah, but he was married to a very good American singer called Mary Montgomery, and they used to do sort of TV things. And,
she's great.
So it's, he's a very good musician. And a friend of mine had his own recording studio, and he used to do a lot of corporate music, and I used to do maybe a horn section. So I was kind of his arranger. I mean, he was a kind of a self-taught, he was a guitarist, he used samples and everything.
Right.
But if he could use live musicians, he was very up for it. But that's probably when I would come in and then I'd do some arranging for him. But he got a job when Strictly first started. He edited the choreographer would say, we want to do whatever, some pop thing. Graham, my friend, would edit the track down to 1 minute 30 or whatever. Right. On the first series, then Laurie would do the arrangement from the thing, because it was kind of pretty much a big band. I think that first series, because Laurie, he was doing that Strictly, and he was doing Parkinson at the same time. So, I mean, he said to me, so I didn't leave the house for about 3 months, because there's a lot of pressure to churn this stuff out. So the second series, he decided to farm out the arranging. So Graham, my friend, it was just sort of, again, he said, oh, there's a friend of mine, he does arrangements for my projects in the studio. So Laurie said, great. And actually, he'd heard of Dad, and again, maybe this is a bit of good luck, because he probably thought he'll probably be okay. I mean, I didn't know Laurie then, and so I was slightly surprised when I phoned. But the funny thing was, I remember when he rang me up, because I'm out quite often on a Saturday night, I didn't even know what Strictly Come Dancing was. And so he said, oh, I wondered if you could do some arrangements. It's this thing for the BBC, it's called Strictly Come Dancing. I said, well, what is it? And he said, it's celebrities doing ballroom dancing. And I just said, Laurie, that sounds like a terrible idea for a show.
Yeah, it's never going to work.
Little realising what a
monster
it would become. And so Malcolm Edmonston used to live very close to here. He used to live in Kingston, didn't he? Was the piano player. It was his gig. So Laurie played piano. I think Malcolm played keyboards, second keyboards. Actually, it might even be the other way around. Maybe Laurie was conducting. I can't remember, but Malcolm was on the gig. So basically, Malcolm and I would they'd farm out the arrangements. I think Laurie still used to do The Last Dance, but Malcolm and I did it for the next few years while Laurie was still the MD. Then he decided to leave the show, and I think Dave Arch does it now. But it was a lovely opportunity, because I think that kind of commercial writing, again, it's a bit like practicing. I'd never seen myself as a particularly fast arranger, but when you've got to, I mean, there was a template there, which is always going to help.
Right.
And Laurie said to me, he said, look, it was a struggle to get a live band on this. So he said, I'd rather you overwrite, because he said, we can always take stuff out. But he said, try and make sure that people see him doing something, which is, again, coming back to the music business, there's a kind of artistic side of it, which Laurie has, but there's a kind of practical nuts and bolts thing. It's always a fascinating balancing, but sort of balancing out. But I mean, again, I'm very grateful for the experience, because it gave me a bit more confidence. I mean, it was kind of commercial. I wouldn't make any claim to it being of any artistic merit, really, but it was a job that needed to be done.
Yeah, exactly.
And actually, if when you come to do your own projects, you've got some chops to a certain extent.
Yeah.
So,
but the thing is, you obviously have to be able to do the job, and to get the referrals, obviously to do it.
Sure.
Week after week. So you've got to have something about you.
I think I realised, back in the days when I was saying I was doing that function band, that you don't have to be particularly good, but if you've got a dinner suit and you can turn up on time, you can work. I mean, this isn't to denigrate anything, because I've seen the other side of it when I've seen really talented people ruin their own careers, and it's not a nice thing to behold, because you know how gifted they are, but human beings can be very complex, and but you just sort of think, just look after the gig. It should be easy, but unfortunately But I mean, that's, as I say, that's just the human condition, isn't it? Yeah. That's going to happen in any field of life. I know that, but I've had things like that. I've seen, you know, lovely, gifted people sort of throw it away. And I think if you're lucky enough to be a musician, music's a difficult thing. You're privileged to do it. I feel very strongly about that, and we're all very self-critical. We've all had the long drive home with the post-match analysis, and you know, I'm very aware of that. But I think the only thing is, if you've turned up on a gig with integrity, you've tried to do your homework, if you're in a position to do a little bit of work beforehand, you've turned up with a completely clear mind, and you try and look up, even if you play terribly, you've got some self-respect, and you think, I've tried to, this is going to sound pretentious, but I've tried to serve music. I think that's something you should try and hold on to if you can, because it's such a wonderful thing to be involved in.
Definitely. Has there ever been anything that you've looked at or tried to do, or have gone, you know, oh, that's not for me, I really can't do that? Or
yeah, there have been situations where actually, going back to the sort of that classical saxophone, it's a very different scene. They've got their own conventions. I would get rung up occasionally, oh, do you want to come play the old castle with such, you know? I said, oh no thanks, you know, I won't do it. So I think that's one thing where I've always sort of drawn the line out. I mean, I've worked with quite a few orchestras, but it's always been if it's been like an evening of film music. So
right.
So anyway, I got a phone call one day from the percussionist at the English National Opera, and he said, oh, we're doing an orchestral gig. And I just more or less said no, before he'd even finished the sentence. And he said, well, I just wondered if you might be interested, because it's West Side Story, the symphonic, it's like a suite from West Side Story. Now, I've done the show, you know, several times over the years, and it's wonderful. And it's challenging because of the woodwind. You do play saxophone, but you're probably also playing piccolo, flute and clarinet. In the orchestral suite, you're just there as the saxophone player. Say you're the guest. It says on the part, in a jazz style, and you've only got a solo that you go, boo-doo, boo-doo-doo, boo-doo-doo-doo-doo, that.
Yeah.
And that's kind of all you've got to do.
Right.
So that I broke my own golden rule. I thought, actually that'd be, because I thought, well, it's easier than doing the show, because I don't have to play the flute, the piccolo. There'll be a proper woodwind section there, doing all the hard stuff. I thought, I can go do-ba-doo-doo and just enjoy it. It sounds great. He says, yeah, it's up at Wogan Abbey. Other half's playing flute on the gig. She can pick you up. I thought it sounded great. And then the night before the gig, on the Friday night, he rang up, oh, just checking over that everything's okay for tomorrow. Yeah, looking forward to it. And he said, oh, by the way, he said, can you chuck your tenor in the boot? Because we're doing Prokofiev, Romeo and Juliet. I went, Nick, I wouldn't have agreed to this, because I haven't played it before. And I said, B, I like Prokofiev too much, you know, sort of. So the night before I ended up with a sleepless night, because I thought, well, do I try and get a debt? But it was summer. And I knew people were away, and I thought, well, I could, you know, I thought, I'm just going to have to man up and do it. And so the funny thing was that I turned up, this orchestra, I said it was most of the orchestra from the English National Opera, so, you know, good players and everything, and the traffic was terrible, and I was sort of late getting there, and I was sort of having to crawl, and it's difficult with orchestras, there's so many of them, you're crawling away, strings, cellos, violas, you know, oh, there's an empty chair, that must be my chair. We sat down, and I was sort of putting the thing, the first thing we actually played was this Romeo. I mean, I'd not even warmed up or done anything, and the thing is, with a lot of those orchestral things, you sat there for a long time. This is why I admire orchestral players. The strings are normally busy, you know, but the brass and the woodwind, you can quite often be sat there for 15, 20 minutes, you don't do it, and then you've got to come in. And that's the problem with that. It's the theme tune for The Apprentice, isn't it?
Oh, yes, yeah.
That's basically what you do. So everybody's been playing the strings, it's been like it's wonderful, a right old racket going on, which if I was just in the audience, I'd be really enjoying. But when you sat there waiting to play and it says on the part, pianissimo, going back to my friend Gordon, it does say, and it's a bottom C sharp, it's a low note on the saxophone, and you've got to come in without sort of cracking the note and everything. So we got to this point, and suddenly it's loud, quiet, and then and I could see the conductor sort of giving me the cue. I went bop, 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 bop. And it's like a march, you know, it's a kind of dotted rhythm.
Yeah.
So I played it, the notes came out, I was in the right place. And actually the conductor was very nice, I said, oh, thank you very, you know, the end of said, thank you very much. He said, could you just make the semiquavers a little bit more sort of classical and less triplet, you know, And I'd really been thinking, I don't want to go boo-doo, be-doo. I didn't want to swing it. I mean, West Side Story, you got to play it that way, you know. And I thought
that's what I was doing.
I just said, okay, no problem. And actually, I felt better later because I mentioned this to a friend of mine. Who was it? Was telling me and said, I wouldn't worry about it because he said Tony Coe played the same tenor solo with the London Symphony Orchestra and Andre Previn. I said, great. I'm in good company if he said it to Tony. You know, I thought, I'm not really enjoying this, but I thought, okay, I've got through it. Let's just hope the concert goes okay tonight. And then they took a break. They played some other stuff that I wasn't involved in. They said, right, we're going to do West Side Story. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, we're only going to use, we're not going to start at the beginning. We're going to go from bar 489 or something. And so we didn't play the whole piece. And my little my little cool jazz solo, that was cut.
Oh.
So I was just sort of doubling up the trumpets or something. You know, it was inaudible, you know, doing the mambo or something. I thought, I'm here under false pretenses. So actually, at the end of the gig, the percussionist who'd fixed the orchestra came up and he said, I was like a jelly, you know. You know, I was just sort of, what have I been through, you know. He came bounding up also. He said, told you it would go okay. And he said, I've got another one of these coming up. And this time I did say, Mick, get somebody else who, you know. I said, I got through it, you know. But just going back to music education, the other thing I didn't, you know, that sort of talking about wanting to play jazz, because I found when I got into my sort of later 20s, and so I was doing a lot of theatre work and I was enjoying things, but I felt I'd really slipped away from the kind of jazz, the jazz world. So I did go on the Jamie Aebersold course, and
was that at Richmond or something?
It was at, actually they moved it to Richmond. It was at Goldsmiths where I'd done the film music thing. I wish it had been Richmond because that would have been handier, you know, but I went on the course, and again, that was great. I really enjoyed, because the wonderful thing is when you do a course like that as a student, you know, especially when you're doing it for a living, because I thought you're there without any agenda. You're not doing a gig to try and make money and everything. You're just trying to improve. And actually, Jean Toussaint was one of the tutors on the course.
Okay.
And I knew him slightly, and he said, oh, I'm slightly surprised. I mean, he knew that I'd played and was... And he said, why have you decided to come on the course? I said, well, Jean, I said, you know, I might play 16 bars in a big band. I said, I don't do any jazz playing, and I really just want to try and get back in the world. And I think I was really lucky because the group that I was assigned to, Dan Hurley was the tutor. He taught at North Texas State, and actually he plays piano on a lot of the early Aebersold recordings. Yeah, the play-along things. And Dan was great because very perceptive and just said the odd comment that was, you thought, oh yeah, that gives me food for thought, and I'll try and do that. And actually, funny enough, going back to what I was saying, I think that's more or less what he was saying, that maybe you need to get a few more cliches going. You know, I was probably just trying too much, and he said, I remember there was one thing where he got one of the guys to count, it's sort of like a standard tune that we all play. I can't remember what it was. Let's say it's Sass and Dole, and the guy went 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, da 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 da, and it was all, yeah. It was just, at the end of it, Dan said, well, was that the right tempo or the wrong tempo? And we were going, oh, well, it was the wrong tempo, you know. He said, but the problem was, he said, you were all sort of worrying about the wrong... You didn't... He said, actually, it's the tempo it was. I mean, do you know what I mean? He said, you put a... I don't know if he phrased it like this. You put a kind of value judgment on the tempo, but you should have just dealt with what was happening then and there. Because he said you wasted precious time sort of being angry about it, which is fundamentally true. It probably sort of came out in the playing. So, I mean, he was good like that. He had a little provocative... Apart from being a very nice person as well. So actually that week of doing the Aebersold thing again, there was a kind of system which I think has been unfairly criticised, because I think good players, if they're adventurous, they can, you know, they can use a bit of that, and then they'll, like you say, they'll find their own voice, and sometimes the backup of something like that. You know, there's all kinds of approaches to things, and that's the beauty of music, and particularly of jazz and improvisation. It's such a wide open thing, isn't it? I mean, I was saying to someone recently that, I mean, this is a magical evening. Well, it was a magical evening for me. I went to see Chet Baker at Palookaville's, which is in Covent Garden. Well, it doesn't exist anymore. So I saw Chet, and then about 11 o'clock, half 11, I went down to Ronnie's, saw Freddie Hubbard. So that's a very good example of the beauty of jazz. I thought two guys playing the same instrument, completely different and equally compelling individual jazz improvising voices, and it was just a wonderful evening, you know, and it was really, made you 3 cheers for jazz.
Yeah, brilliant. Having a kind of famous in the jazz and music kind of industry father.
Yes.
With the same name, playing the same instrument.
Yeah.
Obviously hasn't held you back at all. Did you find any pressures of that growing up, or just living with the name at all at any stage in your career?
Well, I've said to people that I've got the title for my autobiography. It's just going to be Cool by Proxy.
Right, yeah.
So there's a little bit of that. I think I would actually say no, weirdly enough, because I think mainly because of the way that Dad was. He was so, you know, encouraging. And I remember Peter King sent me a very nice email, and you know, because he knew Peter right in the early, and I didn't. He said in the thing, he said, you know, admired your dad very much as a musician, and you know, it was a pleasure to work with him. You know, which is lovely to hear. But he said the thing that really touched me. He said he was so helpful when I first came to London and encouraging. You know, which was good for me to hear.
Yeah.
You know, and I think because of that, I didn't get any pressure from Dad. He just wanted me to have a nice time.
Yeah.
the way that he had, and sometimes he'd say things to me because the funny thing is, and as I say, it was. I remember because he did the music for Mr. Ben, that children's thing, and then for the same company he did a lot of things in the sort of 90s, and I would I think because I'd done a lot of theatre work, so a lot of it was playing the piccolo and the bass clarinet and the flute and everything. So we'd do these little sessions with Brian D, the piano player, who was a very old friend of Dad's. Various bass, I think Alec Dankworth used to do some of them, Malcolm Crease, and sort of various people, and Mark Nightingale used to do them on trombone as well. Right. So we did a lot of them. There was a bit of me that thought, well, obviously Dad's, you know, I wonder if they're thinking, well, obviously he's doing it because his dad's written the music. But I mean, I think to be fair, I mean, because Dad said to me, he said, oh, you know, you play those things better than I ever did, you know, because I think at the height of his studio career, I mean, he said that to me. He said, oh, I do sessions, but there'd be people like Roy Willocks and Ray Swinfield who could really play the flute and the clarinet. He said I was lucky because, so he said I was kind of hanging on to their coattails, but he said luckily there'd be a scene in a strip club where they'd need like a bit of 12-bar blues on the tenor. So he said that was all right. I didn't mind doing that. Yeah. So he said I'd kind of redeem myself doing that. I mean, I think he had mixed feelings about doing studio work, you know, because he'd sort of come to it late. But again, I said to him, but I think his musicality just carried him through situations. Yeah, it was the same sort of thing. I think that actually with doubling, playing the woodwind instruments, because obviously sometimes I've sat next to people who are just flute players, and it's you do feel like giving up just because you think, well, that's how it should really sound and everything. But I think the only thing is if you're playing the woodwind instruments, you're trying to be musical with it and phrase things. You're not going to have the projection of an orchestral flautist, but they spend their whole life doing that, and that's what they need to do. But you know, if you want to play some flute on a jazz gig, then there's generally a microphone. You sort of get in on it and just try and make a nice sound and be as musical as you can. Yeah. That musical thing, but the kind of nepotism worry. I mean, it was funny because I remember I did a thing for Tess. It was like a corporate video thing, and they wanted it was like a cover version of Accentuate the Positive. They were doing that. So I put a group together, like rhythm section and singer and everything. And I thought, I really need somebody to play a solo. And I thought, Dad. so there was, over the years, I'd get Dad to, if it was something where I had some sort of say in it, and I thought he'd be a good fit for it. Right. So it kind of, it sort of went both ways. So I mean, I think to answer your question, I think if there'd been a different dynamic with him. So it did crop up from time to time, and you know, if I played a sort of crappy old solo on something, I'm probably thinking his dad does much better than that, and you know, but you just got to roll with it, get it in the rear view mirror, and sort of start again. But I mean, it was good in the last few years of his life because we did play together. Yeah,
I was going to ask you about that because. Working with the Duncan Lamont songbook, that was...
There was that, that you were part of, and that was really... that was very nice for me as the son, because obviously he was playing less, so I was just delighted that he was getting out and sort of doing these gigs, and it was a nice thing to be part of. And the other thing that we did as well, that a friend of mine, I don't know if you know him, Rowan Kearsey Lawson. He runs he's a vibes player, and he runs a club down in Rochester. And I did a gig for him, and he said, "Does your old man still play?" I went, "Yeah, he's playing great." So he said, "Why don't you come down and do a date at the club, just the two of you?" And I said, "Well, that'd be really nice," because I said, obviously we haven't done any, you know, apart from the occasional songbook thing. I said, "That'd be," you know, I said, "Yeah, great, love to do it." And well, look, why don't we do it? Why don't that's a bit like you do it with me? I'll sort of semi-interview you, and then you can talk about the people you've worked with, Benny Carter, et al. And I said, then we'll play a tune. Like Benny Carter will do When Lights Are Low. If you talk about Benny Goodman, we'll do Strong as a Boy, Frank Sinatra, I've Got You Under My Skin, or whatever you want to do. So I said, then there's a bit of structure to the gig, rather than just sort of playing random tunes. I mean, initially Dad was a bit resistant because he said, "Oh, it just sounds like a load of name dropping." Yeah. I said, "Well, you did work with these people, and actually he's got some wonderful stories, apart from anything else." So I kind of twisted his arm to do that. And actually it was really lovely being able to work together. It was kind of like everything coming full circle. Those last sort of probably, over the last 3 or 4 years of his life, probably did it 8 or 9 gigs like that, which was really lovely. Different. Yeah, we did the initial one in Rochester, then somebody asked to do it somewhere else. So we probably did about 8 or 9 of those dates. And also the other good thing for me was, I mean, Dad was very forward looking. He didn't really dwell in the past, you know. I think that's why he was a little bit reluctant initially to do that. But it kind of slightly prompted him to get a memoir down onto the computer, which actually I'm sort of editing.
Right, oh great. So
I did say to him, I said, "You like the James Joyce of New Malden, you don't believe in punctuation, do you?" So I'm trying to get it in some sort of shape, and I'm going to put it up on his website. But it's been nice for me. I mean, some of the things I knew, but actually there've been things coming up that I didn't know about. And then it's a little bit frustrating because I think, "Oh, I wish I'd just get on the phone." I could have asked him about that and just get a bit more clarity on things. I mean, thank goodness for Google actually, because he worked at the Establishment Club. I don't know if you know that.
No.
That was Peter Cook and Dudley Moore, the comedians. They kind of at the height of their fame. Peter Cook set up this like comedy club. It was probably the first one in London, like a dedicated, like satirical. I mean, they had them in America. Basically, they took over a strip club in Greek Street in Soho. And it ran for about 3 years. So they'd have like a theatre, like kind of dinner theatre thing. So they'd have people like Lenny Bruce came over from the States, Barry Humphries did it, he'd just come over from Australia, Frankie Howard. They'd have all kinds of people. Right. And then down in the basement they had a trio, which was Dudley Moore's group, because I'm sure you know Dudley was a very good piano player, apart from being, you know, a big comedian of the day with Peter Cook. So they were doing a theatre show called Beyond the Fringe. So there'd be a Depp playing the piano for the first set. Second set, Dudley would rush back and he'd take over and do the other set till 1 o'clock in the morning, whenever the gig finished. And then they'd get a different front line. So, I mean, Dad, you know, kind of in there pretty much all the time. But I didn't, so he'd written a bit about this. Actually, I didn't know where it, you know, I didn't know it was on Greek Street or even when it closed or when it even opened. He hadn't sort of put, he wasn't a research guy. Right. There'd just be a bit of a, and suddenly you're in the Establishment Club with it. And I thought, I think it needs a little bit more background for a lay reader, you know.
So kind of going forwards as well, obviously you've kind of done, you know, like you say, part 1 so much. Looking forward to part 2, things that you know you haven't tackled yet, or what kind of things would you like to do? What kind of things are on the bucket list, as it were? So things you still need to. Well,
I still want to win the Oscar for the best film score.
That's a good place to start.
Yeah, it's good to have a goal, isn't it? Yeah. Even at my age. I think the writing thing is probably what I'll do, and it's really, again, going back to Dad. I mean, I don't want to turn this into a kind of Hollywood film thing, but actually, funny enough, the day that he died, in the morning, I mean, just in case people don't know, I mean, he had a wonderful end of life story because he did a gig at the 606 songbook thing, which had become a bit of a annual birthday thing. And then the following day, I drove him down to Plymouth, and he sadly died in the evening when he had a heart attack, but it was very quick. But in the morning, he'd sort of said to me, he said, you really, I think you should do a recording and do some writing. I don't want to say he was passing the baton on, because he was always trying to get me to do things, you know, and he'd say things to me with his songwriting, because he was unusual I think because of the songwriting. Most musicians love songs, but they're not that interested in lyrics. But he was always although he didn't really have much education growing up, but he was very interested. I mean, he had a good understanding of the English language and a great appreciation of it. So he would ask for my advice on lyrics, and I say, well, maybe it could be this. And I enjoyed that sort of editorial role. But I think, sort of creatively, I think this is when you've grown up with someone who's a very creative person. As I say, and things I've talked about when I've had to do arrangements, I really enjoy the challenge when people ring me up to do something, but I'm not driven in the way that he was. I mean, he would write things, you know, just because he felt driven. Yeah, I mean, that was his famous thing. I try and write a song a day, which is not that far off the truth. I mean, he was always sort of trying to come up with things and think, and really with playing, you know, he's sort of pushing the envelope. So it's interesting seeing what I would call a genuinely creative spirit. But I've suggested this because I've done it myself. I think if you don't have that thing, try and give yourself like a deadline. If you want to write some songs, book a studio and some musicians, you know, bankrupt yourself, but then it'll force you to turning up with some material. And you never know, some of it might be good. Even if it isn't, it doesn't matter. The main thing is to do it. I'm well aware of that. So I think that is something that is, you know, I played on, do you know Noel Langley, the trumpet player?
Yeah, he's done some great stuff.
Yeah, I mean, he's a wonderful player. He used to play with Dad's big band. And possibly like me, he's done a lot of theatre work. And he's also been a very busy session player and all that. But he did an album. It was the first thing he'd done completely with his own material. And I played on a couple of tracks.
Yeah, I heard some of that.
It's called Edentide. It's a lovely album, and you know, I thought he's been around well as long as I have. I think he's a little bit younger than me, you know. But it took him until into his 50s before. But be careful what I say. I'm not sure how old he is, but yeah, do you know what I mean? He didn't do it when he was in his 20s. You know, which at one level you think, well, it's a shame because he'd probably have an incredible backlog of his own, which would be wonderful. But then again, you think, well, he was busy doing other things and living his life, and maybe everything in its own sweet time. And I've got a few sort of writing projects, and I would, you know, I'm just enjoying playing a little, getting a chance to sort of do a few more improvising sort of project, and just sort of setting up. I've sort of got in my mind also with educational. I really want to break down the mystique about kind of jazz related things. It's something I feel strongly about, you know, trying to involve an audience in things, because I think it's so important. I mean, not just sort of jazz related things, but I think it's, even from a survival point of view, I think it's something we can offer. I think there's jazz, I mean, that's a great thing on a jazz gig, but I did a thing, I love the show Desert Island Discs, the Radio 4 thing. It's a genius idea. But I tried to do a similar thing on a jazz gig, and I called it Desert Island Standards or something. I just left like a notepad out on everybody's table. The first half, I did tunes that people had been, you know, famous people had been on Desert Island Discs. Like, you know, I'm saying this isn't true, but Gordon Ramsay chose Stella by Starlight. I wish he had chosen Stella by Starlight. But I did find sort of things like that. So that was kind of the format for the first half, and then I'd try and find some stories. And then the second half, I mean, essentially we were taking requests. I did say to the audience, I said, well, this is great, because this second half wouldn't be happening without you. You've shaped it, You've shaped the gig. And I think that's the nice thing about jazz, that you can, I mean, that's not going to suit every, you know, if you've turned out there with your own music naturally, that's a different thing. But I think I think little things like that, trying to engage an audience and just trying to get an appreciation of what we're all trying to do when we go out there, and, you know, lift the curtain up on it. There shouldn't be any mystique about it. It's just sharing some music, and that is something I feel strongly about, because I know it's like when I've been in the audience and people have taken the trouble to do it. It's great. I love it.
So we look forward to the Duncan Lamont Desert Island album coming out very soon.
Yeah, that's a nice idea. Yeah, definitely a writing project of some description. I mean, that was the thing that I admired about Noel's project. The textures are lovely. He's got his kind of core group, but it sort of goes off in sort of different directions. So I don't think I would do something, again, just purely because people do it better. I mean, I wouldn't really be interested in doing an album of standards, you know, under my banner, you know. I mean, I might do. I don't. I mean, actually, if I did, I mean, I'd try and get some sort of theme. It'd be something, some composer I like, but stuff that isn't that well known, or something, you know, maybe to unearth some nice material. That's the only sort of way I'd probably do it. But I think it's maybe just as a writing thing, maybe try and find some unusual instrumentation, that, you know, just sort of see what happens with it. I mean, I've got a few ideas. It feels half baked, but it's just interesting. It's good to have things percolating.
Definitely. And I think you've got to try and you've got to think, doing anything, you've got to have a reason to do it or something to say. Yeah,
I think the thing is, it's funny talking about this because there's a bit of me thinking, yeah, I should really take my own advice. It sounds quite good. But I mean, I worked with a young singer recently, had a really lovely voice. Again, it was just a commercial gig, but when I'd seen him a year or two earlier, sort of he was talking about doing some recording. And I said, have you recorded anything? I'd like to hear. And he said, and when I saw him post, I said, have you recorded anything yet? Oh no, because I'm still thinking about, and I said, try not to overthink it. I think the main thing is maybe do it, and maybe do what, I might have said the same thing, just try and book somewhere maybe, and give yourself that deadline, because I said it will focus your mind, and you'll be forced into it. And I said, you might surprise yourself. I don't know if you've had this, I mean, I've said this, you know, with some really wonderful, you know, real great players. But it's funny how it inhibited some, you know, if you say, have you written anything? Yeah. Oh, I can't do, I mean, they've just dismissed it out of hand. And I generally say to them, I said, but look, you've been in all these situations, you've worked great, but I said, something will come out. And I said, it's just interesting. That was a great thing when I used to do that Morley College band with Gordon. He really, in a nice way, bullied everybody to try and do some right. He said everybody should write. I mean, if nothing else, it really makes you, I mean, anybody who writes music for any kind of ensemble, I mean, regardless of what it's like, I know it's because it's a slog, you know, and they get my respect straight away, because writing a chord of C out for a big band or an orchestra takes time.
It takes time.
Yeah, and it's always more time than you think it. You know, if I haven't done it for a while, I think...
Well, there's just so many ways you can voice that C chord.
Exactly, exactly.
Thanks so much for coming over to Mood Indigo Events headquarters here. Fascinating story.
Thank you very much. And on a personal level, I mean, obviously, I feel very honoured that you've asked me to do it, do as part of this series, and I salute Mood Indigo Events for everything you've done, because going back to being hard work to write a chord of C out, that's actually nothing compared to running an organisation like you do, and it's much appreciated, you know, obviously by the musicians, that goes without saying, and the audiences. You know, you're helping the cultural lifeblood of London and the wider music community. So thank you very much for having me.
Pleasure. Thank you.